So I wanted to share a little bit about our Parsha. The rabbis of the Talmudic period chose which Torah reading for which holiday. So we're not on the regular cycle of Torah readings, and the rabbis had so many choices which reading they would have us read during the Shabbat of the Chol HaMoed, the intermediate days of Passover, and they chose this one. The Torah reading takes us from the middle of the molten calf incident, all the way, which is begins in Exodus chapter 33, takes us all the way to the end of chapter 34. So we're not going to repeat our studies of Torah portion Ki Tisa, which is where this story happens, but I want to link it up to the core idea presented here. I want us to imagine for a moment we've been slaves in Egypt. We're brought to Mount Sinai. Moses on the mountain for 40 days. We're at the foot of the mountain. And right at the moment that Moses is due to come back, the people build the molten calf, cavort with the molten calf, as if to not just reject the divine, but reject everything before that has happened to them. In a way, when you look at the molten calf incident in Exodus chapter 32, they're forgetting slavery. They're forgetting the Exodus. They're forgetting standing at Mount Sinai. And the question is why? That's probably one of our deepest questions. And this takes us to the idea that not only do we remember the creation, the formation of the universe, and the dignity of the human being is created in God's image, that's core to our understanding. Not only do we remember the slavery and Exodus, we also remember the molten calf incident. So I would even add to the Haggadah, this would actually take a little bit of the air out of the Haggadah. Every single person is obligated to remember the molten calf incident. It stands so large in Jewish spiritual psychology that if you're going to remember the Exodus and going to remember Mount Sinai, you have to remember the molten calf incident, which is, why would people choose to forget? Either consciously, they have to push that out of their mind, or unconsciously, what are the forces of forgetfulness? That is, for me, the main theme of the molten calf incident. The forces of forgetfulness, or the forces of denial, or the forces of pushing who you really are out of your mind so you can choose an identity that requires nothing of you. Because if we remember the Exodus, remember the standing at Mount Sinai, we know something is required of us. We have duties in the world. If you forget the slavery, right, and are being bid to reverse slavery by living lives of justice, if we forget the standing at Mount Sinai where our dignity is restored to us, if you forget of all that, we have no duties as human beings. We have the religion of the molten calf. If you remember those things, if you're at the bottom of Mount Sinai and you remember those things, there's no temptation whatsoever to build the molten calf. You're sitting at the bottom of Mount Sinai just waiting for what we have to do next. And I think that's, for me, a core idea in our tradition. There's a rabbinic question, which is the most important mitzvah? And you can ask yourself for a moment, of all the mitzvahs you've ever heard about, which is the most important mitzvah? And my answer, certainly shaped by things that I've read, is the next one. The most important mitzvah is the next one. You'll be living your life, you're in your home, you're walking by the way, you're hanging out with people, and suddenly you have a duty to do something. And I'm going to say for us, the duty for Shabbat. I'm looking around the room, we're all exhausted. We put a lot, if you came to our Seder, we put a lot of work and a lot of energy into the Seder. And I'm one of them who slept all day because I'm still recovering from my surgery. And I realized, well, I have a duty. I have a duty to keep Shabbos. I have a duty to find meaning in Shabbos. If I had my druthers, if I didn't have to keep Shabbos, I would have just stayed in bed. But I have to keep Shabbos. I have to get up, light candles, make myself presentable, and think about Torah. So I would say just my current state of mind is a consequence of duty. And then once, of course, I put myself into the duty, the Spirit begins to flow. So the rabbis chose this because the molten calf incident is the reversal of the Exodus, which is the choice to forget, where the whole Haggadah is the choice to remember. We recite the Haggadah so that we will remember. Now, when one goes into how do God and Moses reverse the molten calf incident, and this you see in chapter 34, Moses says, we can't go on without you. I have to know that you still love me, you still love us, that we haven't broken this relationship. I have to know of your presence. And I'm going to ask everybody to read on your own Exodus chapter 34, where God says, my presence will pass before you. And in some strange verse, God's presence speaks out what are called the 13 attributes of God. By the way, at the end of the Echad Meyodea last night, it ends with 13 attributes, Shlo Asar Midaya, the 13 attributes. That's what we have in Exodus chapter 34 tonight, is what is called the 13 attributes of God. I have it open right in front of me. It says, Adonai, Adonai, God, compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abundant in kindness and truth, preserver of kindness for thousands of generations, forgiver of iniquity and willful sin and error, and who cleanses. Now, the text goes on and ends in a disturbing way, but when the rabbis pulled this out and they put it in the high holiday liturgy and in the festival liturgy, they ended it there. So one thing, if you look at the traditional festival liturgy, which again most of us don't go into the fine print of the festival liturgy, this is there in the liturgy. So another reason why I think we have this, not only does the molten calf incident reverse the Exodus, and here they want to remedy that and have us, number one, remember the molten calf incident and therefore remember the Exodus. You'll see at the very end of our selection. It also wants us to remember the 13 attributes that, from my perspective, the moment where Moses experiences God this deeply is what the people should have been experiencing at the bottom of Mount Sinai. Had they had this deep experience of the divine, they would have never chose to forget. So in some ways, what we have in Exodus chapter 34 is preparing for the people for the second set of commandments that comes down at the end of Exodus chapter 34. I hope you're following my train of thinking. Moses' intimate moment with God repairs the forgetting of God in chapter 32 with the molten calf incident. So as the molten calf incident tries to erase slavery, the Exodus, and Mount Sinai, the section we have in the beginning of Exodus 34, in its own way, tries to erase the molten calf incident and says, we have something better than the molten calf incident, which is an intimate experience of the attributes of God. So I think this is a core part of our identity, the slavery, the Exodus, Mount Sinai, the molten calf incident, which is repaired by an intimate experience of the divine. We go a little bit further in our reading for today. I'm in Exodus chapter 34 now. God says after this really incredible moment of Moses' intimacy, God says, behold, I am sealing a covenant before your people. I shall make distinctions as have never been created in the entire world and among the nations. And the entire people among whom you are will see the work of Adonai, which is awesome, that which I am getting ready to do with you, which means take them through the desert, ultimately to go into the land of Canaan. And then in chapter 34:17, you shall not make for yourselves molten gods. So all of this, and God finally reminds them, what you just did back in chapter 32, don't ever, ever do that again. Don't make molten gods. Remember why do I say molten calf instead of the golden calf? Because the Hebrew word egel hamasecha, which means the molten calf, the Hebrew word masecha also means mask. Because when they made masks in those days, they were made out of a mold. And this is such a deep idea that the molten calf incident was the incident of the mask. And the mask is where we hide from others. We don't want people to see who we are. In fact, we don't even want to see ourselves who we are. It's as if we look in the mirror with a mask on. So the molten calf incident, from a spiritual perspective, is the holiday of the mask, hiding ourselves from God, from each other, and even from ourselves. And God says, no more masking. No more idolatry through wearing the mask. And then it goes down and says in verse 18, chapter 34, verse 18, you shall observe the festival of matzot. For a 7-day period you shall eat matzot as I have commanded you at the appointed time in the month of spring. For in the month of spring you went forth when Egypt. Now, this is all happening roughly in June. when they came out of Egypt. They came out of Egypt in April. They've already forgotten. Now, they're not going to be observing this holiday until an entire other year goes around, but they already forgot. So what God wants to say to them, you just got out of Egypt. You're not going to be doing the celebration, for almost another 9 months, but I want you to remember this is coming up. You are going to have your first Passover since Egypt. The first Passover was in Egypt. What they're going to have in 9 months is the first Passover as a remembrance from Egypt. And God is already telling them now, don't forget to celebrate this holiday because the molten calf incident you already forgot. And so that we have at the end of chapter 34 a very brief recitation of the holidays, which takes us to another very deep theme. Again, there's so many things to teach about here. I'll just pick one more. And that is the rabbis asked, what's the difference between celebrating Shabbat and celebrating the holidays? Well, first of all, the music is different. If you listen to the Kiddush for Shabbat, as far as I understand music, it's very major key. Is that correct? Kiddush for Shabbat? And then if you look at the Kiddush for the festivals, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Is that minor key? Kind of? Ish? Okay. Well, the rabbis say Shabbat is for all of humanity. All of humanity needs to know that God brought the universe into being and we're created in the image and likeness of God. But the festivals are unique experiences of the people of Israel. Slavery, you can say all people should know their suffering, but the experience of Egyptian slavery is something that especially the people of Israel remember. We remember the Exodus. We remember standing at Mount Sinai. We remember the molten calf incident. So some of our holidays, like Shabbat, is for the entire world, but these holidays are uniquely our historical memory of what it means as a people to be called into history as a people, and to remember both the universal sides, meaning Shabbat, creation, being created in the image and likeness of God, and our personal stories as well. So we have in our Torah portion is a deep addition to our identity as a people, and that is the slavery, the Exodus, standing at Mount Sinai, the molten calf incident, the intimacy that overturns the molten calf incident, the reminder not to wear the mask, and the reminder to celebrate Passover. All of this. So when I ask myself, why did the rabbis choose this portion to be read during Passover? I can't think of a better section to read during Passover. They could have read the Exodus. They could have read so many other things. But what they chose for us has such profound, deeper meaning, like the poem that Shanti read. We're going from the Exodus itself to all the other issues, especially this issue of forgetfulness that Exodus chapters 32 through 34, the molten calf incident, that they bring up to us. So I hope when we get off tonight, you all take a look at Exodus chapters 32 all the way through 34. Look at that carefully. The rabbis wanted us to know this during Passover, because when you read Exodus chapter 32 to 34, you really understand what Passover is about. I hope you also read it with the poem that was recited tonight. It's a beautiful poem. It's a beautiful piece of liturgy that reminds us of what should be on our minds during the 8 days of Passover. All right.